All right, today we're going to talk all about what is, in my opinion, one of the most frustrating, annoying, stupid, and just generally unhelpful discussions when it comes to strength training. And that is just debating the risk versus reward of different strength training exercises. So most of the time when you hear this whole risk versus reward conversation come up, you know, the classic culprits are talking about deadlifting or avoiding deadlifting, talking about avoiding back squats or any barbell or bilateral movement, or really doing split squats instead because, you know, risk to reward, guys. I think this whole conversation, it really lacks perspective, context, and it actually lacks a set of useful principles to genuinely determine the risk of all these different strength training exercises. Because in my opinion, when you talk about all the different variations of physical activity and the different injury risks or injury statistics associated with each of them, I mean, strength training as a whole is kind of constrained to the lower risk end of the spectrum due to a number of reasons, and we'll go over them in a second. So I'm here to tell you that whatever exercise you're doing in the gym, as long as you're not smashing yourself in the head with a barbell or something, or you're not leaving equipment scattered around your gym, so there's just trip hazards everywhere when you're trying to walk out a heavy squat. If you're following an intelligent program that gives you gradual exposure to these movements, you do not have to worry about a thing. And we'll also make a case for why split squats may be one of the most dangerous exercises out of the lot of them, even though it's actually not that dangerous. But if you did have to, split hairs, because that's what we're actually doing when we're talking about the differences in potential injury risk between certain strength training movements, again, like a barbell back squat and a split squat, which, I mean, people don't like this in the evidence-based era, but in my anecdotal experience, I've come much closer to dying and seriously hurting myself doing split squats, and so have a bunch of my friends and my colleagues, versus doing heavy bilateral lifts. So why do I think this whole risk versus reward discussion is silly when it comes to strength training? Well, strength training happens in an incredibly controlled environment. I mean, a lot of the time we're indoors, it's air conditioned, either us or ourselves have planned out the session ahead of time, and it's this level of control over all the variables that we have that makes the gym environment and strength training such a safe version of physical activity. Compare that with the sporting field, or hell, even life. You know, you don't get to choose how hard you play a game of soccer. You don't get to decide how hard the defender's going to tackle you in a game of football. You don't get to think clearly and assess the situation when all of a sudden the ball flies off in a different direction and there's just a pile of dudes diving at it, okay? These are a lot of the things. It's the chaos and it's our inability to control all the variables that makes things genuinely dangerous and increases the risk of injury. And we see this in the statistics. I mean, I don't know how reliable all these statistics are, but it matches up with my anecdotal experience, which is really, really comforting. But you can sort of see here, it lines up with this idea that where we have a lot of control over the circumstances, there's a lower injury risk. And then when things start to get a little bit more chaotic and unpredictable, injury risk spikes. I mean, this is even true when it comes to life. So many more people injure themselves falling down a set of stairs, slipping over in ice in snowy weather, stepping out into traffic. I mean, maybe that's a ridiculous example, but life is something that is generally less controllable than the weight room. The weight room is this sanctuary of full control where, like I said, injuries happen, but statistically their incidence is so much lower than pretty much any other domain that you're going to exist in. I mean, getting up out of bed, driving to work, and then all of a sudden you're worried when you step into the area where you have the most control and ability to predict things. So now that we've covered the major reason why strength training as a whole is so much safer than pretty much any other form of physical activity, I want to sort of break down some of the lifts in particular where people discuss this horrible risk to reward ratio supposedly, and talk about some of the sort of incorrect logic that people have used to assess these exercises. And probably we're going to change your mind today about some of your perceptions about what exercises might be exposing athletes to increased injury risk when it's really just nonsense at the end of the day. So first one I want to get into is bench press. Bench press is the classic. It's like, too much risk to reward, especially for athletes who need strong and mobile shoulders. Bench press is going to make them stiff and it's going to lead to shoulder injuries. The reason why you get so many more shoulder injuries associated with bench pressing over whatever functional alternative you've come up with, like push-ups or swinging clubs or tall half kneeling landmine presses, is because bench press is just the most popular exercise. No one's skipping bench press. Hell, no one's taking it easy on bench press. If you had to pick one exercise that literally, especially dudes, everyone who rocks up to the gym is gonna train really, really hard, week in, week out, or where they're really gonna push themselves, because out of all the exercises, bench press is probably the one where we want to hit a PR so we can brag to our mates about it. This is why we have so much injury risk, because again, we have athletes, we have lifters who are pushing themselves when even they know that they're being stupid. They just don't want to admit it. So any exercise that's more popular than another exercise is probably going to have a higher body count in terms of injury statistics, or any exercise that excites the bros. Again, it's not the exercise itself, it's the way that we approach it. Again, the barbell as a whole, a lot of people talk about bilateral lower body lifts like squat and the deadlift being super dangerous. Again, it's just sort of these lifts where the ego does get involved, but it's nothing to do with the lift itself. It's the fact that you're in your head thinking about, oh, so I can't wait till Johnny sees this 500-pound deadlift PR, and you're not really thinking about graded exposure and sensible load selections. So again, if you're in there training like a tosser, you can't go and then blame the exercise, because it gives the exercise a really bad reputation when it was really you and poor programming decisions that led that way. I mean, if you train mace swings like a tosser or tall half kneeling landmine press, it's just as much injury risk with those. It's just that when you go to the pub and you try to brag about your tall half kneeling landmine press, no one's listening to you. It's just crickets. And that's why you see a lot less injuries with them, because just no one's trying as hard, not as many people doing it. Yeah, what's the point of this dumb exercise? Don't get annoyed at me because I hate tall half kneeling landmine presses, just supremely overrated exercise. So there's this idea that split squats are safer than back squats, and my understanding of the arguments against back squats and for split squats in terms of injury risk is we're using less weight, so not as much weight loaded over the spine. Again, I don't know why that's a problem if you're building up to it in an intelligent way. And people just have weird functional beliefs about, I guess, the safety and functionality about being in an asymmetrical stance, which is just completely stupid if you think about it. So are you really telling me that me doing a heavy back squat is really more dangerous than me using, probably 75% of that weight, taking it out of the rack and getting into this really shaky asymmetrical stance? You can probably see where I'm going with this. So yeah, sure, maybe the split squat is a hair more functional than a bilateral back squat, but you've got to have the load on your back for twice as long because you've got to do both sides separately. It's probably going to be it's not going to be half the weight. It's going to be about 75, 80, maybe even higher. And then you'll be shaking around trying to stabilize yourself. Again, I'm not here to tell you that split squats are dangerous or that they have this horrible risk to reward ratio. I'm just saying that people, the way they think about and justify these decisions about exercise selection and risk versus reward, it's just stupid. It lacks perspective and nuance. So whatever angle you're taking it from, just my perspective, again, that strength training as a whole, it's a pretty safe, controlled environment, and these are the things that generally make a physical activity safe. The idea that you can predict what sort of loads you'll be working with, self-select them. Oh, if it feels a little bit rough, rack it, take the weight down for the day. And again, it's really you just programming like an idiot or trying to impress your mates or whoever's watching that creates all this injury risk, but then we don't want to accept the blame for our behavior, so then we just blame the exercise. Kind of went on a rant there, but again, yeah, my view is that strength training as a whole is pretty safe, and even within that, a lot of the ways that coaches like to assess the risk of certain individual exercises, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's also society has a really interesting attitude towards injuries. Statistically, it seems to me like injuries are just a part of life. Even when you are programming smart, things happen, but whenever people get injured, there's always this intense sense that you've done something wrong, that injury should never happen, and that we've got to find a scapegoat and we've got to find something to blame. And yeah, it's nice to be able to find something to explain why you got injured, but I think this urge to place blame on things rather than just accepting that, to some extent injuries happen. I'm not saying that if you're getting injured every single week, you should probably reassess things, but just getting an injury here and there from deadlifting or bench pressing, or again, more than likely, a lot of these injuries are actually happening to you when you're playing sport or just out there in life. So, these things happen, and I think we need to focus more on that. Getting injured isn't the end of the world. I mean, most people recover from these injuries, they get back to playing their sport, they get back to training, and they exceed their previous best. It's not like injuries are a death sentence. Some injuries definitely more serious than others, and I'll do a few videos sort of breaking down my thoughts on this. But yeah, I just wish that we had a different attitude towards pain and injury as a society and as an industry, and just a little bit more acceptance of them, and like, I don't know, dealing with a sore shoulder for a couple of days or a bit of back pain for a few days and training your way around it. It's not the end of the fucking world. And I mean, I never want to say that I'm 100% grateful for pain or injury, but I feel like I benefit from the experience of like living through it and coming out the other end of it. And then also like, talking with other people about those ideas, be like, oh, you hurt your back deadlifting. Who gives a shit? Let's just find a starting point again and just start pushing that rock up the hill. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this perspective on the different risks associated with different strength training exercises and just pain and injury as a whole. It's not the end of the world. Again, it shouldn't be celebrated when we hurt ourselves. I'm not saying you should go out of your way and just say F it and train like an idiot. But I mean, if you do, it's just not that big of a deal to me. If you're a coach and you're sort of sick of all the outdated narratives that just scare the shit out of people who are looking to train hard and make gains, check out the GPP Level 1 course, because sort of go through my perspective on human movement, my perspective on pain and injury, and how we can mitigate those risks and empower our clients to train hard without being neurotic messes or fragilistas. So if you're interested in that, check out the links below. Also got a bunch of free programs. You can get a week of my programming for free as well if you want to try that out. And I'll see you in a couple of days with a new video.